The night after Stormkissers returned to Sunspear, Oberyn could not keep to his bed. He walked the coiled galleries of the Tower of the Sun, barefoot for the feel of stone and breath of sea, the scroll's copy warm against his ribs. From some unseen courtyard drifted the splash of water upon tile and the faint, pearly laughter of children being herded to sleep. It tugged at an old stitch in him that had never closed. A babe with violet eyes and a little girl whose feet used to slap the marble in this very tower. He stood a long time looking out at the black seam where sea met sky and told himself, as if prayer could harden into oath, that the truth he carried would not be buried again. At dawn, the Shadow City opened like a flower. Traders' unfurled awnings dyed indigo and saffron. Caged songbirds trilled over pyramids of figs. Spice dust rose in orange clouds from mortars. Oberyn watched the waking of his home while Areo Hoda delivered the night's tidings, voice steady as a drum. Scouts report Lannister outriders on the Stone Way, 3 days from the pass. Ser Adam marches careful with baggage and wagons for water. He knows desert, or has read about it, Oberyn said. Books are a poor map for thirst. He turned. Send riders to Vaith. Lord Daeron must close his wells to strangers. And to the Hellholt, ask the Euler to let the lions taste hot sand under their boots. They like games. Areo inclined his head. And Ironwood? That name drew the faintest twitch at the edge of Oberyn's mouth. The blood between Martell and Ironwood had cooled over a century but never truly curdled. Anders Ironwood called himself blood royal in his cups and smiled with all his teeth when sober. I will ride to Ironwood myself, Oberyn said. Nymeria comes. She has a tongue made of silk and steel both. He found Nymeria in the citrus walk, slicing a pomegranate with a little bone-handled knife. Each seed a ruby set into white. She did not look up. If you want me to charm the blood royal, say so plain, she murmured. You hate asking. I don't hate it, Oberyn lied. I despise it. She laughed and licked a thread of juice from her thumb. Anders prefers to be asked by beautiful women. If I fail, Obara can always challenge him to wrestle next. Oberyn plucked a seed from her palm. If he chooses sides by muscle, we will know his measure. They rode by noon, for swift coursers and 2 lean men to change horses at wells. The wind smelled of hot stone and crushed thyme. Beyond the water gardens, the land rose toward the red mountains in waves of rust and shadow. Vultures rode high, lazy circles written upon the pale vault of sky. Ironwood's walls stood the color of old bone where the stone way narrowed between fangs of rock. Within, orange trees wept shade into the inner ward and a bronze fountain sang to itself. Anders waited beneath a striped awning, a heavy man gone to seed gracefully, his eyes fox cunning above a beard like steel wool. At his elbow stood his son, stout and flushed, eager to bite something softer than bread. You bring sand with you, Oberyn? Anders said, embracing him with the minimum of sincerity. It gets between teeth and truths. His gaze slid to Nymeria. And you bring the truth with eyes. Eyes see what they are shown, Nymeria replied, smiling. We bring something truer than both, water rights and war. They fenced with courtesies and bitter jests until wine dulled the edges. And then Oberyn laid the parchment upon the dark ciderwood table between them. He did not speak while Anders read. He watched the pulse stubborn at the man's throat, the yellow flash of his ring when the page trembled in a draft. When the Lord finished, he folded his hands over the parchment as if to warm them. The Tower of Joy, Anders said at last. I sent 6 men there when I was young, to nose out proof for a quarrel in a tavern. They found only stones and ghosts. You bring a ghost's voice. Arthur Danes, Oberyn said. Gerald Hightowers, Oswell Wentz, and Eddard Stark's hand as witness. Which makes the boy at the wall a danger, Anders mused, looking not at Oberyn but at the water arcing from the bronze mouth. If he is nothing, Tywin will grind him under heel to be safe. If he is something, the realm will drown. He shifted his weight. What do you want at my pass, Prince of Dorne? Exactly what it is named for, Oberyn said. Passage. For Lannisters, none. For Ravens, many. For Dorne, the choice of when and who to bleed. Anders's laugh was soft. Your sister's ghosts sing sweet, but my people dislike dying to music. Peace buys bread. War eats it. Nymeria leaned in so that the gold beads at her throat chimed. Peace buys time, not safety. The lions sent a knife to the wall wearing a traitor's cloak. We pulled it out, and it dripped widow's blood. Do you think that poison stops at Snow's? Anders looked at her a long time. His son stared at Nymeria's mouth as if spells might fall from it. You come asking me to choose between lion and spear, Anders said finally. Blood royal or Sunday? The old quarrel again. Very well. I choose Dorn. He lifted 2 fingers. Servants brought a narrow casket lined with blue velvet. From it Anders took a key wrought in black iron, long as a dirk and scalloped like a leaf. This opens the west gate of the Black Cannons, he said. My grandfather had it forged when the last war cooled. We never gave it south. I give it now. Lock the pass. If the lions want in, make them climb. Oberyn took the key and found he had to swallow before he could speak. Dorn will remember this. Dorn always remembers, Anders said. It is what we do worst and best. His smile flashed. I shall drink to your sister tonight, and to the boy whose name you do not speak in halls. They rode out at dusk, the key heavy in Oberyn's saddlebag, the air cooling as if a fever had broken. Nymeria rode knee to knee with him, the ghost of her smile alive still. He likes to be begged, she said, and to be believed. He is both easier and harder than I thought, Oberyn said. That's the trouble with men. Women are worse, Nymeria said cheerfully. We have more ways to be both. By the time they reached Vaith, night had sharpened into a blade. Lord Darren's men had sealed their wells with thick iron covers, and ditches full of brackish water gleamed like snakes under starlight. Somewhere beyond the dunes, a lion banner prowled. They could smell grease and horses on the wind. Oberyn sent Tyrion into the dark with 6 spears and a bag of caltrops shaped like cruel little suns. Do not kill, he said. Make them angry and thirsty, not brave. Tyrion kissed his cheek and smiled like a saint and a cut purse both. An hour later the darkness near the dunes erupted with curses, panicked snorts, and the bright metallic noise of iron against iron. Tyrion returned smelling of horse and success. They'll limp till dawn, she reported, and their water skins found holes where there were none. It is a strange land, full of strange charity, Oberyn said, and sent 10 more riders to sweep the gullies with empty water skins to spread as trophies. At Sunspear, Doran received Anders's key and held it a long time as if feeling the pulse left in it by his brother's hand. He gives us a door we may close, the prince murmured, but every door has another side. On the far is a Lannister with a battering ram, Obara said. Let him break his arms. Tyrion had spent the day in the archives, elbows deep in parchments with the seals cut away. He came to council that night with ink on his fingers and an expression both wicked and weary. My uncle's letters from the march read like a list of sensible sins, he announced. He detours around wells he cannot guard, marches by night, feeds his men lentils to make the latrines less cheerful. He wants the pass but not a fight. He wants to sit and make us move. Then we do not move, Doran said. We let sun and wind do the arithmetic. But we must tell him numbers, Nymeria said. Else he multiplies at leisure. Give him a term, a demand he cannot meet without cutting his own throat. Oberyn laid the copy of Arthur Dayne's oath upon the table. Give him this term, he said. Deliver the Tower of the Hand-sealed files for the year the war ended. Give us the names of all who stood watch on the day the bones came back from Dorne. He cannot, for he is among them. Let him bleed from that old cut. Tyrion rolled a pomegranate seed between thumb and forefinger until it squished. And if he counters with Robert's wrath, dredged like a net to catch you? Robert is dead, Oberyn said. Wrath rots in the grave without new meat. Cersei's wrath is fresh enough, Tyrion said dryly. But she does not love records. She loves fire. Ilaria, who had sat quiet as a cat at the hearth, lifted her gaze then. "Send a letter north before we send one south," she said. "To the boy, not the bear. Bring him in from the cold with a candle before we light bonfires." Oberyn turned toward her like a man toward shade. "Write it," he said. "You have a better hand than mine." They wrote together at a table pulled close to the window where a slice of moon lay on the sea. Illyria's script ran clean and flowing. Oberyn's words at first came hard, then faster. To the man called Jon Snow at the wall. "You do not know me, but my blood knows yours. I slew a monster who slew my sister. I did it in the name of justice, but there was another name behind it, a name I had not known. The truth of that name lies enclosed. If you burn this letter without reading what we enclose, you will still have my respect. If you read and rage, you will have my understanding. If you read and are silent, you will have my patience. Come south when your oath allows, not before. A war waits for you that is colder than oaths and older than kings. Until that day, beware traders with rich cargo and poor thirst, and men with soft hands and cold eyes. Beware lions in snow. Beware friends offering peace in rooms with no windows. Your mother's name is a flower that grows in winter. Your father's name is a song men tried to bury under stone. Both live in you, from a man who loved your aunt, and loves you for her sake and your own, Oberyn Nimmerose Martell." He enclosed a thin copy of the Tower of Joy affidavit, cut short of titles and stripped to the bones of names and oath. With it he sent a ribbon, the crimson braid he had threaded through his hair when he danced with the mountain, still faintly stiff with old dust and very faintly sweet from Illyria's fingers. The raven left before midnight, black against black, a moving piece of the moon. Oberyn watched it go until his eyes watered. Illyria pressed her temple to his shoulder without speaking. On the wall, Jon woke before dawn without knowing why. The air in the little cell had a taste like iron and frost. When Sam burst in, white-faced and grinning, with the little leather tube in both hands, Jon was already sitting on the edge of his straw mattress with his boots half on. He read the letter slowly, once through, then laid it down and stared at his hands. He did not open the second parchment immediately. He looked at the ribbon. He lifted it as carefully as one lifts a child, ran it across his knuckles, and closed his eyes as if there were a scent in it he knew from dreams. Sam watched in a silence that trembled. "If you don't want to," Jon nodded without looking up. "I have to." He unwrapped the copy with the care one gives to the last bread in a storm. The words were spare and absolute, names like stones set in a line he could walk by feel even if snow blinded him. Arthur Dane, Gerald Hightower, Oswell Went, Eddard Stark, Witness. He did not weep. It was not a thing his body knew how to do for this. But his breath came ragged for a time, and he remembered his father's face the night he had asked about his mother and had been told only that next time, when he returned from the south, he would speak of it. Ned Stark had never returned. The promise had wintered with Jon all his life, a seed that would not sprout. Now it did in a season that owned no spring. He wrapped the copy in oilcloth and sewed it with clumsy stitches into the lining of his cloak. He tied the ribbon around Ghost's neck. The White Wolf shook himself once and leaned gently into Jon's hip as if to say that the shape of him had changed and that it was all the same to a wolf. He went to Maester Aemon at once. The old man did not touch the parchment for a long time. He sat with his blind eyes upon Jon's face, and Jon had the strange sense that the old man could see him most clearly when he did not try to look with the eyes he had. "I saw your father as a boy," Aemon murmured. "Not Ned Stark, the other. He learned to carry sorrow as if it were a sword. Sorrow cuts the hand that holds it. Do not grip this so hard you cannot fight with anything else." Jon managed to say, after a long time, "How do I fight with this at all?" "By not letting it choose your enemies for you," Aemon said. "There are enemies enough." Cotter Pike was not a man to weep over kings, dead or hidden. He was a man to swear when he received a second raven that morning, this one from Eastwatch's man in Gulltown, confirming that the trader's ship which had burned in the bay had sailed from a pier known to be frequented by men who boasted in low voices of a pale maester with unclean hands. Pike thrust that letter in Jon's hand and spat. Your name is in somebody's mouth who should be chewing his tongue. Keep your head low, Snow. The world wants it. Jon went to the top of the wall at sunset with the ribbon around Ghost's neck and watched the sky go from iron to fire and back to iron. He thought of riding south on the tide of his blood right now, and he thought of the men who would die for that tide if he did. The wind coming off the haunted forest was like a thing with teeth. When it bit his face, he felt very awake and very young. South of him, the Prince's Pass locked. Anders Ironwood himself rode up to see the gate drawn shut and the great iron bar lowered with a grind like thunder. Oberyn Martell sat her mare on the ridge above with a coil of javelins at her knee and watched the Lannister van shift like a field of bright beetles in the distance. Ser Adam Marbrand was no fool. He did not charge a gate he could not batter down quickly. He made camp where a low line of hills cut the wind and sent out parties to test the dry riverbeds. Twice in the night there were horses screaming, and once a wagon burst into a brief yellow tower of flame and then to black. In the morning, Marbrand found iron caltrops in the hollows of his men's boots and reached down into a shallow puddle and lifted a torn waterskin that had been cleanly slit at the seam by an unseen hand. He sighed and told a squire to bring the map. "Send to the Boneway," he said. "If the pass is shut, holes remain. Snakes love cracks." 2 days later, he learned that the Boneway's narrow defile had sprouted 100 men with bows, and that their arrows flew strangely low and fast and found joints in armor better than countrymen's usually did. He stared at a recovered shaft, licked a finger, and felt the tack of sap on the fletching. "Ghost wood," he said. "They cut their shafts from wood that remembers wind differently." He was a soldier who could smile at a small art of war even while it cost him blood. But smiles do not move mountains. He settled to wait, and waiting is a war with time that only patience can win. Lannisters have patience when they have bread. Dorne knew this. Dorne sent ants to their flour. Kevin Lannister sent letters as well as outriders. One came to Sunspear with a white flag and a seal in good green wax. His hand, crisp and courteous, offering to return Tommen's old betrothal promise with Myrcella unstained and escorted by Septus to Sanctify, if Dorne would only open the pass for supplies and accept the crown's contrition in coin measured out in public in the water gardens that all might see. Doran read the letter and imagined the open palms of the Shadow City waiting to catch those coins, and imagined the sound a boy makes if he is struck with a knife at the wall. He folded the letter and held it at the candle's edge until the wax at the seal ran and hardened like blood. "Tell him," Doran said, "that peace is not bought with the same coin that purchased murder. Tell him we will open the pass when the crown opens its chest of truths. We require the testimonies of men now dead. We require the account of a day at a tower in the desert. We require, in Tywin's hand, an apology addressed to Elia and her children by name." He added after a moment, "And we require a promise under faith that no armed man of the crown shall cross our borders without writ from Sunspear." "That last," Tyrion said, "is a pretty way to say keep your war out." He dipped quill and wrote it as if he were setting a hook. The reply came back faster than Doran liked, which meant Tywin had not had to think much to frame it. The hand was square, lean, legible like a ledger. The words were stone. The apology was a refusal. The rest was ice. Tyrion read it aloud in a voice that did not belong in his own mouth. Nymeria laughed once, a single note with too many edges. "We tighten the gate," Doran said. "We feed our people. We send food to Vaith and Hellholt and Godsgrace, so that love for Sunspear can compete with fear of Lioncoin. And we send for the Fowler of Skirich. I would like to know how the Boneway sings under a storm of stones." Oberyn went to the practice yard at dusk and put his spear through the paces until sweat ran into his eyes and the dust turned to paste under his feet. Ilaria watched from the shade, her hand moving without thought to the swell under her ribs where breath lived. When he was done, she stood and came to him and put her cool palms to his hot face. "You are burning yourself," she said. "There is more than one fire." "There is one I can hold," he answered, and it was not quite either truth or lie. That night he dreamed of a tower with 7 sides and no door, and a woman inside singing a song without words. He woke with the taste of iron on his tongue and went to his table to write a letter to Jaime Lannister because in the dream the song had become a golden hand beating on a table for mercy and no one listening. He wrote without cleverness and without insult. He wrote of Rhaegar's songs and of Elaya's patience, of a boy whose mother had been crowned queen of love and beauty under an ash tree in a place that should have burned and had not yet. He asked Jaime, not as Kingsguard or Oathbreaker, but as a man who had once been 17 with a sword like a promise, whether he remembered the day a northern lord's bones came home, and if the boy who bowed his head over them looked anything like anyone Jaime had seen in his father's hall later with black curls and serious eyes. He sealed the letter with orange wax and a pressed sunburst and sent it by a courier who could disappear and had. In the citadel, after the midnight bell, the seneschal sat with his hands in his lap and stared at the table while 3 archmesters argued like crows over a carcass. Marwyn was not there. He had taken a ship at dusk, a heavy-keeled caravel called the Witchlaughter that smelt of pitch and cinnamon and had oars as well as sails for when the wind turned traitor. He had left a note that said only that reading and doing were brothers, and that he was going to seek the younger. Pate stood in the doorway and watched the seneschal's knuckles whiten and loosen over and over as if he were squeezing a fruit that would not break. It was a useful thing, to learn what a man did with his hands while his face made speeches. Far east, Daenerys slept and dreamed not of thrones but of a field of new wheat that put up blades of silver. And when she woke, the sound of Drogon's wings on the dawn made her smile because it was a sound like a book being shut, and sometimes endings were doors, not walls. Barristan told her more of Rhaegar that morning because she asked. He told her how the prince sat and played his harp until even hard men forgot to be hard, and how his eyes went distant sometimes when he turned a page as if words could pierce lips and make him bleed. He did not tell her that kings and their sisters died because he had not known before how to make that true and kind in one breath. He tried now because in the letter from Dorne there had been a phrase about blood walking cloaked in frost, and he had seen frost in the eyes of boys on the stepstones, and it had always been the cold of the sea, not the sky. She listened with hands folded and thought of nephews and of the way families were chains that sometimes warmed and sometimes burned. The second week of the standoff at the pass brought a dust storm like a night in noon. Wind pulled sand into the very seams of armor, and the Lannister camp turned its back and bent like wheat before a scythe. Obara rode into it laughing, a scarf over her mouth and her eyes narrowed to slits, and found the wagons by taste rather than sight. She did not burn them. She cut harness, opened casks of water, and let them spill into sand that drank as if after a fast, left little piles of date stones where the sentries would put their boots down and feel nothing until they slid. She came back with sand gathered in the curve of her ears and a grin so bright that even the dust seemed to light. Adam Marbrand stood in the lee of a hill with his cloak over his head and listened to his scouts talk about devils in the storm and invisible blades, and he nodded and said that devils were largely a matter of angle and patience and that they would change both. He had his scribes write letters to the Marcher lords promising spoils if patience broke, and to his wife promising to come home with all his limbs attached if not his pride. He did not write to Tywin that he considered turning back because he did not yet. He was a man who liked work, and the work here was to see which side made the other move first. Every morning he looked at the hills and counted small black dots like carrion birds. Every day there were more. He did his sums and did not like the answer. On the 4th morning after the storm, a lone rider came down to the Lannister camp under a strip of white linen fixed to his spear. He wore a long ochre cloak and the beard of a man who had not stopped long enough to shave. He asked to see Ser Adam. The guards laughed and then fetched their captain. The captain laughed and then fetched their lord. The rider took off his hood, and it was Tyrion Lannister with dust in his hair and new lines at the corners of his mouth. "Uncle," he said, "I brought you shade." Adam blinked and then barked a laugh that he did not mean. He took Tyrion to his tent and poured wine and gave him bread and salt without thinking, and then cursed himself for the first 2 and pretended the third had been his only intention all along. Tyrion sat and swung his legs like a boy whose feet would never grow to touch the floor, and told Adam that if he remained he would lose men to thirst and fury and to small stupid accidents, and that there were better ways to bleed than giving the Martell songs. He did not threaten. He offered numbers. How many men Dorne could put on ridges in a night without anyone hearing? How many arrows one could make from a stand of ghost wood? how far a horse could carry a man with a dry tongue and a sore heel. He set each number on the little travel board Adam used for tallying grain, and he let the numbers sit like stones. Adam drummed his fingers and asked after Kevin. Tyrion said that his uncle had the measure of Dorne's courtesy and Cersei's temper, and neither added up to a bridge. He asked after Jaime, and Adam's mouth closed in the way of men who keep confidences even when those confidences are swords that might cut the hand keeping them. Tyrion asked after his father, and Adam said only that the hand did not enjoy waiting, and that fewer men had enjoyed waiting with Tywin than had enjoyed dying to his schemes. Tyrion said he had brought a letter. Adam read it without changing his face and then set it under a stone. "I cannot turn back," he said, "and I cannot go forward. You have brought me the midpoint on a line that goes nowhere." "Sometimes," Tyrion said, folding his hands, "the middle is the place one lives long enough to see the end." Adam barked a laugh that tasted of sand. "You have your father's way of making insults sound like advice." "I am trying to have my own," Tyrion said, and stood. He left the tent with more guards than he had entered it with, though all of them pretended they were escorting him to safety and not to a clean place where an arrow could slip between ribs if a sudden accident should happen. No arrow did. Adam had given his word at the flag, and Adam's word was iron. Tyrion mounted and rode back into the sun with a white strip hanging limp now that the wind had died. At dusk, Oberyn stood atop the Black Cannon's gate and watched two little lines of fire creep along the Lannister camp where cooks had finally lit their evening stew pots. The fires looked like embers spilled on a great black cloak. He felt, for the first time in days, the tug of the North stronger than the draw of the immediate fight. He wanted to be at the wall to see the boy put his hands on the truth and come back with his shape changed and his eyes the same. He wanted to speak to him not in letters but in the rhythm of boots on a hard earth and the breath two men share when they run. A hand touched his elbow. Nymeria stood there with a piece of news folded up in her smile. "Varys sends a whisper," she said. "He says the queen nurses a new mountain from old bones." "All bones feed worms," Oberyn said. But he remembered the sense of a large shape moving behind a curtain, and he did not pretend the world did not make monsters when it wanted to. He said very quietly, "Let them bring him. Let every sin wear plate and walk so the world can see the shape of what it did." On the fifth night, the wind shifted. You could smell the sea if you stood at the highest ridge and tilted your head and pretended you had a sailor's nose. Men slept a little easier in both camps because the air was not a wet cloth anymore but a handkerchief that let breath through. On the sixth day, a raven dropped from a sky pale as fish belly and let itself fall almost to the ground before it flared and alit on the Black Cannon's battlement. Its belly carried a black leather tube with green wax at the cap. The letter inside was short. The hand was Jaime's. It said only, "I remember a ward brought to court with a lord's sons who would not look at the queen for the way she burned and who asked the names of every statue in the Hall of the Hundred. He loved history and had no history. That felt like a kind of cruelty even then. I do not keep oaths I make to kings. I try to keep oaths I make to myself. If you ask me if the boy looks like anyone I saw later, the answer is yes, and I will keep the rest for a time when swords are not listening." Oberyn read it twice and then tucked it into his jerkin with Arthur's oath. He said nothing. Nymeria said nothing. The birds wheeled above them, fearless of the two silent figures and the iron bar beneath their hands that held back an army. On the wall, Jon trained until the muscles over his ribs felt like ropes that would not quite span the gap between two mooring posts. He did not look at the copy each day. He had read it into himself, and it sat there now like a hot stone that sometimes burned and sometimes warmed. Ghost slept with his muzzle on Jon's boot. Sam wrote at nights to his father and tore up the letters and wrote again to his mother and tore those too. Aemon told stories of dragons with more patience than teeth, and Jon listened and did not ask the question that rose to his mouth again and again like a fish to a torch. What does it make me? He knew the right answer was what it had always been. A man of the Night's Watch. He knew another answer now, too, and sometimes he wanted to say it aloud just to hear whether his voice broke on it. A week after the raven with the ribbon, another came bearing a different weight. The parchment smelled faintly, impossibly, of orange blossom. There were no words. There was only a small iron key cut delicately like a leaf and a drawing of a gate with 7 bars and 1 bar marked in ink the dark color of blood. Jon understood it not at all until Aemon touched it and murmured, "Prince's Pass." Then he understood it perfectly and not at all at once. He understood that the south was a thing someone was building a road through for him and that he was not allowed to walk it yet. He went to the top of the wall at moonrise and held the little key up so the light made it a sliver of star caught in iron. He thought of a tower in a desert and a woman with winter flowers in her hair and a man with music in his fingers who had sung the wrong world into being because he thought it the right one. He put the key back into the pouch and knotted it shut and told the wind, "Not yet." The wind was the only thing that nodded. In King's Landing, Tywin looked at a map and at the ledger beside it and at the account of ships idled because the Dornish ports did not load grain for Lannister garrisons, and he lay his hand flat on the paper until the heat from his palm made the ink look wet. He had won more impossible games than this by never letting the board see that it had frightened him. He ate half an apple and put the rest aside because appetite, like mercy, was best rationed. He wrote 3 letters, one to the Iron Bank because there was a number he could move that would frown on Dorne, one to Pax to Redwine because blockade was a word that could be written with grapes, and one to a man in the Stormlands who liked to hunt men when deer bored him, because sometimes terror made the math change for a while. He did not write to the Queen. He had stopped writing to the Queen when he realized he had begun writing to Wildfire. Cersei held vigil over a shape that had once been a man and now was a promise to herself. The promise stank of herbs and old blood and something necessary. She spoke to it because she needed to speak somewhere and the gods had turned silent. "When you rise," she said, "you will not answer Dornish questions. You will break Dornish teeth." She had always believed that the right kind of strength was the only language the world obeyed. She had learned that men did not always obey it, so she had decided to keep a man who would. At Sunspear, Illyria went to the water gardens alone after the 3rd night without sleep. The children there did not know about locks on passes or the names of kings. They knew about apricots and how far you could run without your breath getting too hot to swallow. She sat with her feet in the water and watched a boy teach a girl how to float by putting his hand under her back until she trusted the water to be a hand. When she rose, the corners of her eyes were dry and the rest of her, somehow, less so. She found Oberyn on the terrace and put her fingers around his and said, without looking at him, "You have been carrying a spear so long you have forgotten that you have 2 hands. I need both to hold it," he said, and then after a moment he let out a breath he had not known he was keeping. "Remind me how to use the other." She did, and later, when they lay with the sea crashing like applause below, Oberyn felt the shape of his fury change from a spike into something wider, like a shield. It did not make him less dangerous. It made him harder to pierce. News came like summer lightning after that. Quick, bright, and never where you were looking. In the Reach, a rumor that a Tyrell cousin had seen a red woman in a sept arguing with a septon about prophecy, as if it were a bill for candles. In the Riverlands, small folk set upon a Lannister foraging party with flails and frying pans and made them drop their salt pork and their dignity. In the Vale, a raven flew crooked and landed on a windowsill where a little lord with weak lungs had set out crumbs, and the boy laughed when it pecked his finger and only cried later when the pricked spot swelled black, and no one thought to ask where the bird had come from. All of it was noise and none of it music, but men marched to noise just as they did to songs. Then a courier from the Boneway limped into Sunspear dragging a leg that had lost an argument with a loose stone and carrying in his pouch a letter in a hand Oberyn did not recognize. He recognized the seal. A wolf's head stamped into wax that had been melted too quickly and hardened too fast, as if the thing that stamped it had not wanted to linger near heat. The letter said, "We will not be the first to cry king for a boy who has not cried for himself. We will be the last to bend the knee to a man who stole a crown on a corpse. If the boy is who you say, show him the north and let him choose the shape of it." Signed, "A woman who knows winter. Meege Mormont," Nymeria guessed, tracing the letters with her nail. "Or Asha Greyjoy mocking us. Or someone who prefers fur to silk," Oberyn said. He folded the letter and put it with the others. The pile under his hand had gotten thicker. He felt, for the first time in a long time, that the weight of what he carried might push the world in a direction he could walk without stepping on the bones of everyone he loved. That night, he went back up to the highest gallery and looked north again. The sky was a different shape there. You could feel it even when you could not see it. He told the darkness a thing he had not told anyone. "I am afraid," he said, and the word did not taste like defeat. It tasted like truth, which is a harder thing and cuts deeper but makes cleaner wounds. On the wall, Jon stood with Dolorous Ed and watched a meteor fall, a streak of quick fire that burned out too soon. Ed said something about omens that made a man wish for a cloud, and Jon said nothing. He touched the place in his cloak where the copy lay sewn and the little iron key, and told himself again that the right enemy for a man is the one at his gate, not the one in his blood. He thought of the gate at the Prince's Pass and of a man holding it with one hand and sending letters with the other, and he wondered how long a man could do two such difficult things at once before his hand slipped. The answer, like all the answers that mattered now, would come later than anyone wanted and exactly when it had to. For the moment, the desert held its breath and the wall did not. Somewhere between them, in the great loud silence that is the sound of a world waiting to change, a viper slept with one eye open and dreamed of a boy walking out of snow into sun with a sword that had learned a new song. By the second week, the standoff at the Black Cannons had taught every man in both camps the taste of his own breath. Dust-coated tongues, patience became a grit between molars, and the sun moved like a lazy executioner across a sky too bright to look at. When the wind did blow, it came off the west, hot with the smell of goat and thistle. When it fell still, the world seemed to hold itself a heartbeat too long, as if denying the next. Nymeria began to send children down from the ridges to the Martell cookfires with baskets of apricots and earthen pitchers of water. "Let them see what we protect," she said. The boys and girls ran barefoot through the scree, nimble as lizards, and paused near the Lannister lines to stare at the shining men who did not smile back. The children smiled for themselves and ran laughing anyhow. That night, 3 of Adam Marbrand's sergeants cut their own rations and sent them to the front rank. Men, even lions, are softer in the presence of children, though they pretend not to be. A courier from the Bone Way brought a square of cloth upon which a Fowler Lorimer had stitched the pass in small, exact thread. Every switchback, every narrow throat where stones could be loosed. Doran traced the sewn ridge with the tip of a finger and said, "We will not need it if patience holds." He did not say that patience is a muscle that trembles after too long under a weight. When Oberyn could hold in place no longer, he rode west to Starfall with Tyene and 2 silent spears, craving more than parchment proof. The sky over the Torrentine was a roof of hammered brass. Dragonflies stitched green light over the river. Starfall rose clean and pale from a jut of cliff like the blade of a sword driven into the earth. Its white walls could take the sunrise and turn it cold. Oberyn had always liked that about Dane's stonework, the way it made light honest. Lord Edric Dane waited in the high hall, too slender still to fill a lord's chair, freckles fading under a young man's beard. The sword Dawn slept on its felt on a dais, unassuming as legend could be. Edric looked from Oberyn to the blade and back, uncertainty and pride warring in him. "I won't ask to lift it," Oberyn said before Edric floundered for courtesy. "It isn't for me." "No," Edric said, relief too obvious to be anything but real. "It isn't for anyone now." He gestured to a woman standing half in shadow near a pillar, hair gray as weathered ash, hands scarred with old work. "Willa," Edric said. "She kept my mother's children at her breast, and the prince's." He stopped, as if a wall rose in the word, and then he went on, because boys made into lords learn which walls can be walked around. "She will speak what she knows." Willa regarded Oberyn the way one regards a sandstorm a mile off, with a measuring eye and a readiness that accepts there are things one cannot do with doors. "I kept the boy while the fever took the mother," she said, voice like a rind of bread cut thin. "I saw the way the prince looked at him. Whatever men cried afterward about sin or stealing or vows, that look was not of theft. It was of someone who hears a song and knows it won't let him rest." "Lyanna," Oberyn said. "Lyanna." Willa nodded. She put a blue flower in her hair on a day when the air tasted like iron, and it made her laugh. She said she had always wanted to wear one and never had the right to. I don't know king's rights. I know a woman's laugh when it comes from her ribs. Oberyn closed his eyes and saw again his sister's hand on his when they were young, the bones fine, the blood fierce. And when, after? The Stark carried the boy himself and would not let a maester take him until the dust settled on the road. He fed him once, awkwardly, and cried without making any sound, like a man who doesn't want to scare a horse. Willa's mouth twitched. I told him men who cry that way scare worse. But he was a northern lord, and they don't listen to anyone but honor and hearth ghosts. She drew a breath. He asked me to say I was mother if anyone came pelting questions at my door. I asked him what it would cost me. He said my name. I said I would give that. Names aren't worth as much as milk. Edric blushed for his house. If there is blame, put it on me for bringing you into this hall. But if there is truth, I won't stay blind and call it courtesy. Oberyn bowed to Willa, not as a prince to small folk, but as a man who has asked a thing and been given it. Your name is worth more than milk, he said, but thank you for lending bot. Ash. He stood a long time on the balcony that looked out over the Torrentine crashing white below. The spray made his skin tacky. Dawn sat like a quiet star behind him, and he did not turn to look again. He did not need to. Some legends feed a different kind of hunger than the ones men make of swords. On the road back, they took the lower path and came upon a shepherd with a flock pressed like clouds against the slope. The man had a harp strapped to his back, which made Tyrion smile. He offered a song for a waterskin and sang of a prince and a tower and a septa whose book had no words written in it. Only the dent of lines where someone had traced with a finger and never inked. Songs are nets, he had told Ilaria. He found he did not mind this once being caught in one. Back in Sunspear, Ariohota met them with a man in a salt-stained cloak at his shoulder. The newcomer smelled of tar and honest fear. His hands had the old rope burns of a smuggler. He bowed, awkward but not servile. Davos, he said, once Seaworth, once a pirate, now the king's hand, though I've only two and both are rough. The king, Oberyn said, though he knew the answer. You could hear law in the man's words like iron under barnacles. Stannis, Davos said, by law and oath and grit. He sent me because truth sits in me heavier than wine, and I don't spill it when men stare hard. He lifted his wrapped bundle. He asks parley. He offers bread and salt and truer coin than lions give. He offers a thing he knows you will not trust and another you might. Doran received Davos in a small room whose windows looked on a private garden and whose tiles had been warmed by the afternoon sun. Davos sat on the edge of a cushioned bench as if knowing that the cushion belonged to another class of man and the bench to all. He set the bundle on his knees and unwrapped it. Inside lay a parchment with an orderly hand that looked as if it had been sharpened on stone. It says your princess died unjustly and her children with her, Davos said. And it says a king ought to say that out loud and do something about it. King Stannis says it. He will. He will name those who did it and carve the names into law. He will give you writ that no sword crosses into Dorne without Sunspear's leave, and he will seal it with faith and with fire both. Davos hesitated. He cannot give you the throne for this boy you're protecting with paper. He won't lie that he would. But he will swear, this part is mine, not his, that the North will be the North if the boy wants it. That he will leave the North to its snows and build his wall with men who know how to freeze without breaking. Oberyn heard the nettle of Melisandre's shadow in those promises and the stone weight of Stannis' law. He also heard something in Davos that did not belong to anyone else. A rough, unschooled righteousness that had come up from the same tide as salt and hunger. You believe him, Oberyn said. I don't know if I believe gods, Davos answered. I've seen them in flames and in men dying with their eyes wide open and their hands trying to hold their guts in. I believe a man who keeps the same face when the bowl is empty and when it's full. Stannis does. Doran leaned his swollen hands on his cane and looked at the smuggler as if measuring a poorly cut gem for the truths inside. He asks us to cry king. Davos shook his head. He asks you to say lion law isn't law. He twisted his mouth. And to send him ships. He can't say he isn't asking for that. War eats wood. He gestured at the window. He sends me to the man with the spear because the man with the spear kills monsters. He'll need that in the snow as much as in the south. Ilaria brought a bowl of olives and a dish of goat cheese and set them down between them like a truce. Davos ate the way honest hungry men eat, with thanks and without performing gratitude. When he had gone, under Ario's eye, with a guard that had no ostentation and would not lose him to a knife in the alleys, Doran and Oberyn walked among the bitter orange trees a long time without speaking. He is not wrong, Doran said finally, about law, about lions. He is wrong about thrones, Oberyn said, but not even Rhaegar's son can wear 2 crowns at once, one of snow, one of fire. I don't know that he should try. He pinched a leaf and smelled his fingers. We will keep ships. If the night needs them, we will send them north. But we will not cry king we do not mean. Not again. He remembered Rhaegar with his harp and thought of how music can be a knife if you hold it by the blade. They sent Davos away with a letter that promised nothing and offered truth for truth. It said, in Doran's patient hand, that Dorne would not march with lions or with stags, but would close its doors against both. It said that if King Stannis meant to look to the wall with more than words, Dorne would send wood and iron to Eastwatch to be made into shields and spits and whatever else men need when they wait for something colder than politics. Oberyn added his own line, that if Stannis had a mind to hold law against wildfire, he would find a friend in Sunspear, not a servant. That night the sea sent up a wind that smelled of rain before any clouds formed, and the Shadow City's lanterns seemed suddenly to hang lower, as if tired. A boy climbed the outer steps of the Tower of the Sun with an expression he had been told to have, solemn, swift, frightened. He carried a long, narrow chest with 2 seals on it, green wax and black. From Old Town, he rasped, as if a long run had rasped more than his throat. Inside lay the lead plates Marwyn had etched, proof cut into dull metal that would not burn. Alongside them, in a roll tied with stained twine, sat a different kind of proof. A letter from the Archmaester of Ravenry, a roundabout apology for the confusion in our lower vaults, and a promise that a committee had been appointed to inquire into the provenance of certain scrolls. Morality and scholarship, Tyrion observed, squinting at the looped script, were apparently trades the Citadel believed could be practiced in a group. Committees are ships with 10 rudders, Tyrion said. They go in a direction someone decided last week by accident. Ships still move, Oberyn said. Sometimes toward rocks, Tyrion said, and winked at Tyrion. She put a finger to his brow and pushed gently until he squinted. You have sand in your head, she told him. He shrugged. Better that than wine this once. Toward midnight, Varys's little bird arrived in the rookery with a thin note like a knife. The new mountain walked, it said. Used no name. It said there would be tourneys again after morning because a queen needed a show, and in the shadow of spectacle law went deaf. It said the Riverlands bled quietly. When the Faith asked questions at Harrenhal, they found men washing stones at midnight. It said the Iron Bank had written back to the hand with language that tasted like iron and numbers that did not come when called. It said, in a line that made Doran put his hand to his chest, that a young girl with a half-healed scar had been seen in the alley behind the Street of Sisters, and the guards had passed her by because who counts girls at night? Your spider sings too many songs, Obara said when she heard the gossip. He will choke. Men have choked on less, Oberyn said. He glanced at the plates. We will not. At the Black Cannons, on the 8th dawn, a white flag went up in the Lannister camp and Adam Marbrand rode out alone to the halfway rock. Obara went down the slope without waiting for leave because she did not ask leave to breathe. They greeted each other with minimalist courtesies that acknowledged no one owned the ground beneath their horses. Adam lifted his visor to show he didn't plan to hide his eyes when he lied. I will pull back 10 miles, he said. If you open the pass to bread wagons and let the men who are not made of iron drink. No, Obara said, but you can send your boys down to the stream at first light and last, and will not shoot at them if they keep to the water and leave their armor on the bank. He smiled under his graying mustache. We must choose between heatstroke and nakedness? The Martell sense of humor is famous. It is also armed, she said. Do we have a word? We do, he said, and took a skin of water from his saddle and drank without shame or show. Tell your prince there are men in my camp who think someone should throw a torch on the powder jar and be done. I am not one, but powder works whether a man means to light it or not. Tell your lord, Oberyn said, that there are women on our ridges who think a lion's pelt is pretty on a floor and that they can always get another if the first gets stained. I am not one either. They looked at each other a moment longer, two professionals whose profession had eaten most of their easy feelings long ago. Then they rode away. The truce held over water, and men washed dust from their mouths and forgot, for long swallows to feel brave. That night, songs drifted across the camp valleys. A Westerman sang something brooding about a green field under winter sky. A Dornishman answered with a plucked melody that tasted of citrus rind and knives. They were not answering one another. They were talking to sleep. Jon Snow began to talk to sleep too. He spoke to it of names and of promises and of a woman who had smiled at a flower and of a man who had held him like balefire in the snow. Then sleep came. He woke to bells. 1 for men at the gate, 2 for wildlings in sight, 3 for something worse. It was 1 bell. He lowered his hand from Longclaw and went to the yard where Ed tried on a joke that fit like a borrowed boot, and where Gren yawned like a man who had earned it, and where Sam smiled as if he was guarding something inside himself that would grow if he stared at it every day. Jon ate with them and did not say the thing, still, that kept wanting to come out of his mouth. He rubbed the ribbon at Ghost's neck and watched the wolf twitch an ear and yawn. Pink tongue a sudden silly flag in all that stern white. Before noon a rider with a Tarly badge clattered through the gate, cloaked in rhyme. He had come from deep down with letters and with news. The Riverlands shook again, the Tyrells did this and the Freys did that, but under it all small folk said there were white shadows in the reeds that did not make ripples when they moved. Jon took the letters to Mormont and the news to the men with the grit that made them listen. He did not take either to his heart. His heart was too full of the one thing it could not set down without breaking. Late that evening, Tyrion brought a jug of hard pear brandy and 2 cups to Oberyn's balcony. He poured. The brandy had a taste of wood and rot that was not unpleasant and made Oberyn's lips numb. "Did you ever think," Tyrion said, "to come back from King's Landing with what you went for?" "No," Oberyn said. "I thought to die. It would have been simpler. It would have left me with no one civilized in that city," Tyrion said, then raised his cup in mock solemnity. "I drink to your poor taste in survival." "And I to yours in family," Oberyn said, clinking. They drank and watched lightning far out at sea, flickering like a god's argument too far away to be heard. Tyrion put his cup down and said a thing like a man deciding to step into cold water. "When I was a boy," he said, "I used to play at being a king who needed no crown. You play at being a man who needs no throne. We are both poor at games." He frowned, then smiled because he did not like his face when it frowned. "You sound like Doran when you stand still. When you move, you sound like yourself." Oberyn laughed softly. "Doran taught me when to stop talking. I have not always obeyed." "You obey when it matters," Tyrion said, and did not say he had learned too late to do that himself. He drank and said instead, "If I wrote a letter to someone in the Vale asking them to lend their ears to a rumor that the Queen's champions aren't men anymore, would that be treason or gardening?" "Both," Oberyn said. "But garden. The Vale grows lords out of granite. They need more rain." He went down to the training yard later and showed Oberyn a new feint, how to let the spear tip seem to want one side of a man's throat while the rest of the man forgot that throats have 2 sides. Oberyn learned it like men learn songs in war. Tyene watched and learned how to watch. Nymeria learned how to look like she wasn't watching and how to write with the hand she hoped the world wasn't reading. The next morning, a rider in an oiled cloak from the Greenblood handed Oberyn a pouch tied with a sailor's knot. Inside lay 3 small stones, each carved with a scratch that made no picture if you looked at them alone. Together, under the right finger, they made the stylized shape of a kraken. The message it made in his head was not from any hand he liked. He closed his fingers around the stones and felt the seas pull like an old bruise. "The Greyjoys smell change," he told Doran. "They will try to make it stink of them." "The sea will feed itself," Doran said, and set the stones aside as if they might crawl. From Old Town, Pate sent a message of his own in secret ink that glimmered only when Tyrion breathed on the parchment. It said that a chain of gold had argued with a chain of iron about words being weapons, and that the chain of gold had won because it had eaten more dinners with men who owned ships. It said that someone had opened a chest and found nothing, and someone else had closed a door and found everything they had been hiding still in their hands. It said, in a line that made Tyrion laugh helplessly, that scholars are cats. They knock truths off tables to see how they fall and then stalk away because it is the table's fault. "Will they help?" Oberyn asked. "They will help their own history," Tyrion said, "which is to say, ours when it is written." Under the moon 2 nights later, Areo Hoda intercepted 3 men with smooth boots and the wrong calluses on their hands trying to buy a map of the water gardens with coin that smelled too much of king and not enough of fish. They died clumsily. Areo handed Oberyn a token one of them had carried. A disc of carved bone with a 7-pointed star on one face and a small, careful engraving of a rose on the other. "The faith and the reach," Oberyn said, weighing it. "Or a smith who works too long and borrows imagery." He put the disc into his pouch beside Jaime's letter, Willa's truth, Arthur Dane's oath. The pouch felt like a new organ in his body, one that circulated something thicker than blood. He dreamed of the wall again, this time not of towers, but of stairs cut into ice and a boy's boot grinding frost with stubborn rhythm. He woke with the taste of salt and iron in his mouth and went to the gallery where Ilaria liked to stand when the air was sweetest. She was there, hair a dark river, face turned up to meet the wind. He pressed his mouth to the bend of her shoulder and stood like that a long time until the shapes in his head settled back into their assigned places, and the ones that had no place retreated to the edges where they could wait their turn without breaking the rest. In King's Landing, a tourney truly was held. It had banners enough to remind the realm of color, and wine enough to let songs be written about it later that made it sound like something other than a woman managing a crowd with gold. A mute giant in gleaming enamel rode for the crown and did not bow when the queen rose. His lance shattered 3 knights from the saddle in 3 passes, each time with a neatness that looked to the crowd like prowess and to Tyrion, reading the account days later in Sunspear, like someone breaking chairs. He set the parchment aside and did not say aloud the name that made his teeth ache. He said instead to Oberyn, "If the world were a play, I would complain it lacked a director." "The world directs itself," Oberyn said. "That is the grief and the grace of it." Jon Snow began to count a new thing on the wall. Nights when the cold came from the woods instead of the wind. He told himself it was a trick of currents. He told himself it was memory sitting in his bones like a man too stubborn to leave a room everyone else had. He sent more men to the east and fewer to the west and made the letters to Eastwatch brisk and deliberate so his hand would not shake. He wrote one to Sunspear, too, and he used the plainest words he had because he did not know how else to talk to a man who had written him a line about lions in snow that had saved his life. "I can't come," he wrote. I won't. I won't leave the gate I swore to hold. If you need me in the south, need me in the north instead. If you can spare food or iron, send it to Eastwatch. Don't send men. Men die here like they do everywhere else, but the deaths feed something I don't know the size of yet. I don't know what I am to you. I know what I am to this wall. If there is a time when one of those breaks the other, I'll choose in the only way I know how. Until then, keep the passes closed. Ice leaks through cracks. Oberyn read the letter twice and then again, and on the 3rd time he smiled because the sentences were cut like good leather. No waste, no show. He folded it and put it with the rest and went down to the armory and told the quartermaster to begin filling casks marked for Eastwatch with nails and iron dogs and hooks for climbing and kettles for pouring and whatever else a man might need to make a world that was not ready to kill him a little more so. He walked out into the morning and found Doran already on the high stair, one hand on the rail, face turned toward the sea. "We are sending north," Doran said, as if he had read the letter over Oberyn's shoulder. "I have ordered 6 hulls loaded at Planky Town. If the Red Wine Fleet tries to turn them back, we will learn how fast their oarsmen can row when they have to." "If the Red Wines turn them back," Oberyn said. Let them keep the iron. They will need it sooner than they think. A boy carrying figs staggered past, and Ilaria took the basket from him with a word and gave him a coin and a pat on the head. She held out a fig to Oberyn and one to Doran. The fruit split under Oberyn's thumb with a wet sigh. The seeds inside looked like 100 small suns. "What is it you think?" Doran asked. "When you look north like that?" "That I am late," Oberyn said. "Late to everything. Late to Elia, late to truth. Late to sons I did not have and daughters I did and did not know how to protect from the world's teeth." He lifted the figure. "And that sometimes late is still in time." Doran chewed and swallowed and closed his eyes a moment as if the sugar hurt. "Sometimes," he agreed, "and sometimes late is all we are allowed." When the first of the Planky Town cogs slipped out, the river carrying them like a hand as far as it could before the tide had to take over, the Shadow City climbed onto roofs and wharves to watch. People waved as if sending off cousins for a wedding, because in Dorne joy and danger had always sat at the same table and argued about who had brought the better wine. Oberyn stood on the quay until the hulls were little more than smudges. He felt the old itch in his legs that wanted a road, a fight, a tower to climb. He stayed where he was. He had learned a long time ago that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is not go. On the third evening after the cogs had gone, a storm finally broke. Fat drops slapped tiles like thrown coins and the streets ran quick and brown. The water gardens sang. Adam Marbrand's camp hunched into itself with the misery of Itty men whose boots will not dry by morning. Obara rode out into it again because rain was simply a different temperature of sky to her, and she returned streaming and grinning and listening in her head for the name of the next thing to fight. The storm lasted 3 days. When it cleared, the air smelled new. You could see farther. From the ridge above the Black Cannons a man could make out, if he had good eyes, the sliver of the summer sea where it bit the land and foamed. From a watchtower at Castle Black a man could see the forest below without the shiver that comes when snow drives that sense narrow and near. For a little while the world's breath was easy. It did not last. Nothing does. But men are made to use such pauses like smiths use the cool between heats. To shape, to plan, to remember what their hands are for besides closing into fists. In that pause, Oberyn sent 3 more letters and bound one book with leather that had belonged to a pair of shoes he had worn the day he first saw Ilaria. He told himself he did this because leather needed reuse and not because he wanted to put something he loved into the thing he was sending a boy he had not met. Tyrion laughed at him and kissed his temple and said he was lying to himself badly, and he laughed too because sometimes love is letting yourself be seen when you are ridiculous. He did not pray, not to the Seven, nor to R.H. Lore, nor to any of the sly, ancient gods that steal warmth in the desert and give it back as mirage. But he stood in the place where wind and salt and stone met and said aloud, so that the world would hear and know it had been said, "Elia, I am doing what I can. If there is more, sing it to me in a way my stubborn ears can learn." The breeze lifted his hair like a woman's hand, and it was enough. In the Red Keep, a girl with a scar who had learned to move like a shadow watched from a roof as the mute giant rode through torchlight. She did not know his name. Names are masks. She watched how the horse hated him, how it took 3 grooms to keep the animal from bolting every time the thing in armor shifted its weight. She filed the knowledge away. She kept other knowledge in other pockets. She was a cup with no bottom. Someday she would pour. In Old Town, Marwyn's caravel ran before a wind that smelled of cinnamon and grave earth. He read by lamplight with the book braced against his chest and cursed quietly in tongues men swear gods do not hear. He did not know if he was going to a queen or to a disaster. He supposed it would be both. He hoped the queen had a good ear for ugly truths and a better one for songs. When he slept, he dreamed dragons curled around libraries instead of hoards, and woke laughing at himself for being sentimental. At the Black Cannons, Adam Marbrand wrote in his book that lions could eat dates, but dates did nothing for patience. He drew a small picture of a spear with a ribbon. He drew, under it, a line that could be either a snake or a river depending on how a man looked. He closed the book because he had learned not to let men see him draw. On the wall, John sent men out and brought them in and slept so hard when he slept that his body forgot once or twice to dream. When the dreams came back, they were not of thrones. They were of a door opening, and a man with eyes like the river in summer standing in it holding out his hand. Jon did not take the hand. He stood and said, "Not yet." The man nodded as if he had expected no other answer. Then he stepped back, and the door stayed open. Jon woke with the feeling in his chest of air going both directions at once. He sat up and laughed because sometimes your body mocks you kindly. He went out onto the wall in the hour before dawn when frost is on the stone like powder and the world is reduced to black and white and breath. Ghost padded along. The east was a gray seam, the kind seam a good seamstress makes when she means for a garment to hold. He stood there thinking of seams, of holds, of hands. When the sun rose, it lit the ice and the boy and the wolf as if the world had spilled a bowl of milk and decided to call it day. He watched until the light got the better of the cold. Then he went inside, parceled men and oats and iron, and began again.